I started being an observer of the craft beer industry in Western Canada in the early 2000s. So basically 20 years I've been doing this. And I like to joke that when in those early years, I could make 3 phone calls and know everything that was going on in the beer industry across the prairies. That changed unbelievably quickly around 2015. I very quickly lost the capacity to stay on top of everything, to talk to every new brewery, which was what I used to do. I'd give them a profile before they opened up or just as they opened. I had to give it all up because the industry exploded just that quickly. I'm Jason Foster. I'm a beer writer and educator based here in Edmonton. I am the beer columnist for CBC Radio in town, and I'm the creator of onbeer.org, a website devoted to craft beer on the prairies. And I've been an observer of the craft beer industry in Western Canada for longer than I can remember. And I think what struck me, in recent years is just the unbelievable explosion of craft breweries in Edmonton and in Alberta, but also across Canada. I mean, if we look over just the last 6 years ago, over the last 6 years, the number of breweries in Canada has doubled. In that same time period, Alberta went from 24 breweries back in 2016 to now over 140. So we can see there's this massive expansion of craft beer and local craft breweries across the country and across the province, except that period of rapid growth appears to be quickly coming to an end. We look at the data for 2023, and we can see that basically the trend line is flat. The number of breweries that are closing now matches basically the number of breweries that are opening. That's true both across the country, and it's true here in Alberta. So we obviously, this period of you open a brewery and you're almost guaranteed to succeed, that's over. And worse yet, most industry observers, including myself, think that 2024 and 2025 will see contraction. We will see more breweries closing than open, and the size of the industry will start to shrink. That's not a panic button. That's, I think, a natural evolution of any industry. It's a maturation of the industry. You see players fall out. You see new players arising that can kind of outcompete. And so I think that's a natural churn that we haven't been seeing, and that was the unusual part of the craft beer industry for the last decade, is we hadn't seen that kind of churn. So we're starting to see it now. But I think it also is in the broader context of declining beer sales. Consumers are drinking less beer than they did a decade ago, both because some people are just simply drinking less for health and other reasons, but people are also choosing other options. They're going to hard seltzers, they're going to these ready-to-drink kind of mixed beverages, and so they're finding other options, and so they're not always necessarily going to craft beer. Craft beer itself is probably still growing as a proportion of the market, but the overall pie for beer is shrinking. So what that means is anybody who wants to get into the industry or anybody who's currently in the industry is looking at a very different environment than when many of the breweries that are profiled in this documentary opened. And so it's going to be a lot of hard business decisions will need to be made, and breweries are going to have to get smarter, and they're going to have to get better, both in terms of their quality of their product and the quality of the experience that they give, but also just being a better business and doing their operations more efficiently and more effectively. So I think that's kind of the lay of the land. I think if I think about the lay of the land in Edmonton, by my count, currently we have 22 breweries in town. We have 22 breweries, another 7 kind of in the outlying capital region. By comparison, Calgary's got 47. We've lost count of how many are in Vancouver, which tells me that there's still room to grow in Edmonton. We have not maxed out our capacity for craft beer in this city. I think that we will continue to see new breweries open, and hopefully the ones that are open will continue to find a way to survive. So but we've certainly in no way, I think, have hit saturation in the Edmonton market. I would argue that the Edmonton market is actually underserved still. That there is still more, there is demand there that isn't being met. And I think we see that with the popular openings of a number of new breweries that opened up kind of in the summer, and how popular they've been and as quickly as they've become popular. I think that says that there's a lot of still appetite out there for good quality craft beer. And so I think there's lots of room for growth. I think Edmonton has always been a bit of a lag when it comes to the craft beer industry. In Alberta, but I think also in Canada, and there's a number of reasons for that. I mean, Alberta's policy, landscape was quite poor up until the 2014, 2015, and so forth, and so that was holding back the industry. But I think the other reason Edmonton has always lagged behind, especially if we compare it to Calgary, is just the nature of the economy in Edmonton and the nature of where the capital availability is. And so Calgary, especially during the big boom time for craft brewing in Calgary, which was between 2016 and 2019, that was a period of declining oil prices. So there was a lot of oil money laying around finding a place to be put. And so a lot of the breweries in Calgary were able to get going quite quickly based upon that influx of capital. That's never really happened in Edmonton. We have a much more, we're obviously, all of Alberta is dependent upon oil, but Edmonton being more of a government town has, I think, a more sort of stable and more diverse economic base, which means, though, ironically, there is less free capital around to be able to invest in a startup brewery. And so that means then that it has to be a little bit more sort of families putting money together or finding a handful of investors to be able to kind of put some money behind the operation. And that by nature is a slower process. So it means slows down the number of breweries that you're going to have. And I think that's kind of what's happened in Edmonton. We see a lot more family breweries or, a couple of friends who decide to open up a brewery. And we see a lot more of that. That has the downsides of it being harder to be capitalized, being harder to kind of get opened up in time. The good news is, though, is you don't have impatient investors. And that's one of the challenges, I think, right now in terms of the beer industry, is we're seeing a lot of people who put in their money a few years ago, they're expecting a rate of return. And they're expecting a rate of return right around the time where that rate of return is hard to come by. And that's, I think, creating a lot of difficulty for a lot of breweries around the country. In particular, I think in Ontario, we're seeing significant collapse. In fact, just this week, 6 breweries in Ontario announced their closures in a week, which is kind of a remarkable figure.
So I'm Aaron Eisenbart, formerly one of the co-founders of Asymmetrical Brewing. This past November, we just celebrated our 1 year in business, and shortly after, obviously, we had to close down. We had to close our doors to the public. Tough decision for us to make. It took a long time for all of us to come to the concise decision. As I think I've mentioned before, there's 5 co-founders, so there's 5 individuals that are voting on the opportunities and what this business is going to be in the future, as well as some investors that we take their opinions, seriously as well. Question that we get asked quite often is, when did we know? What did we know? When did we decide to make the decision? And it wasn't a 6-month decision, and it wasn't a 1-day decision. It was kind of built up over time. We were definitely striving for bigger things and trying to make some impacts and make some changes. Shortly us leading into November, just after our 1-year birthday, we ended up revising our food menu and trying to focus on different avenues that could, generate a little bit more business through the doors. A lot of questions asked on the regular in regards to, where's most money coming from? Is it coming from outside sales? Is it coming from the tap room? And I think that varies depending on whose business and what brewery you talk to. For us, generally, our bread and butter was the bodies walking through the tap room. I think that goes for a lot of new businesses, even if you do have outside sales, where you can make sales to a lot of different businesses, but until the general public knows who you are, until you've made an impact, until you've made a brand or a name for yourself, that product's not going to move off those shelves. And that was definitely a challenge that we noticed over our first year of business, getting our first cans into stores and on our own shelves come March, and then from March until essentially closing day December 31st. So our biggest challenge was, it wasn't a challenge to get into liquor stores in Alberta or in Edmonton. We've dealt with some wonderful, wonderful people in the restaurant industries, in the liquor stores themselves. They've been super supportive. But because we're new, we're green, it's harder to move that product. And if you're not moving that product, one sale is one sale in that regard. So that was a big focus that we wanted to try and strive for, is building the brand. And you'll hear that a lot in today's day and age. Building a brand, doesn't matter what kind of business that you're in, brand is king. People go to what they recognize, they go to what they're familiar with. And while people are very excited about trying new things, I think the beer community, especially in Alberta and Edmonton itself, people are very excited about trying new things. They always lean into what they know. And there's a reason that certain brands have stuck around longer, and it's because they've built that brand over many, many, many years. Some newer ones have just done it a different way, and they've been able to.
So I think, if I think about the breweries, both in the past and more recently, right? Situation Brewing, Polar Park, and Yellowhead, also relatively recently. I think when I analyze kind of what happened, right? Two Sergeants is another one that went down in the last couple of years. I sort of see 3 causes. And obviously every individual business failure has got its own unique dynamics, but I think I see 3 things that contribute in some factor in all of the collapses in one way or another. And the first was that, not in all of the breweries, but some of the breweries, was a quality of the beer problem. Inconsistent quality, or production issues that just kind of plagued the beer. Especially you often would see that near the end of when they're just kind of reaching their last legs. You could almost start to smell the death through the beer as it would go downhill. So that'd be the first factor, and I certainly think there's a partial calculation, but probably not even the most important. I think the second possibility is sort of internal business issues, is not being properly capitalized, not having sufficient cash flow to be able to kind of survive lull periods, or as I mentioned, the having investors who started to get impatient. So those are all kind of business factors, right? That any business, regardless of your industry, is going to come across. And COVID really exacerbated that, right? If breweries that were kind of just squeaking by before COVID, they didn't stand a chance, because they just didn't have the cash to be able to stretch them through. And I think the third is just shifting. This is the shifting marketplace, right? Is things have when the ground can move out from under you, and that can be in a couple of ways. It could be that a newer brewery opens up that's more interesting, that's making beer that's more appealing, and so the customers kind of drift away from you. Or sort of the macro, like the building we're sitting in, right? Before COVID, Situation Brewing had a viable business model and was working. It was working, right? Brew pub in a popular sort of, commercial space with lots of traffic, focusing mostly on selling beer and food in the brew pub. COVID smashed that model to bits. And I know what happened at Situation is they just simply ran out of runway, because after COVID, after all the restrictions and were eased, people still haven't returned. People aren't going to restaurants as much as they did before COVID. And so for a business that was anchored around having people putting bums in seats in your restaurant, that becomes highly problematic. And obviously that's not just the beer industry. We're seeing that across the hospitality industry. Restaurants are closing because their customers aren't coming back. I think that's what happened to Situation, is that their business model fell out from under them, right? But no fault of theirs. It's just the world changed. And so I think those are kind of the factors that lead to when a business doesn't quite be able to figure out how to survive, is that combination of quality, business issues, and where the consumers are moving to. And the consumers are constantly moving. They're constantly shifting, right? There's lots of questions for the future about the breweries that exist today that have built their business around tap rooms. That's a model that worked quite well, but if people are wanting to stay home more and they're not going out to tap rooms or restaurants or bars as often, what does that mean in terms of having to shift your business model, right? You need to find a way to have them, have cans for them to take away, and you need to find ways of getting distribution in liquor stores more than you may have had to pay attention to that 5 years ago. So I think those are all challenges that the existing breweries in Edmonton are going to face, is they're all going to confront it, is they've got to figure out how to do that. While they, as you get more breweries and more tap rooms with a relatively smaller customer base, because they're staying home.
I think that was the biggest effect on us as a whole. Myself coming from the hospitality industry, I've been in there for over a decade. I was, I guess, lucky enough in the best way to say it, to work all through the pandemic, working with Just Skip the Dishes, just to go orders, things like that. Working in a 15,000 square foot restaurant or 10,000 square foot restaurant with no bodies in the building. You got 2 cooks and 2 people just packing up to go orders all day. So we saw that. I definitely think that there's some lingering from the pandemic, people being a little bit more conscious about going out. But I think the longer lasting effects is with the economy in itself. And I think that was the biggest piece of the nail in the coffin. And there's no slight against the people of Edmonton or anything that's going on. It's, all of us, including myself and my partners, all have to be smart about where we spend our money, how we spend our money, and when we spend our money. And I think that was definitely a big factor and played a big role in the challenges we saw with people coming down here on the regular basis. Again, I lean into, going into some bigger places, not necessarily breweries, but restaurants, where these names are recognized, but even them, they're slower. They might be full on a Friday night, but traditionally on that Friday night, they would have 50 people lined up out the door, or they'd have, you'd have a wait list of 2 hours, and you're just not seeing that in anywhere. And that's including the big brands, North American brands. I frequented a lot of breweries and restaurants over the last 6 months as I was, we were striving to try and figure out what we could do differently and looking at, call it competition. But we wanted to see what was kind of going on. And that is definitely what I noticed. There's a lot less people going out, a lot less people that are willing to just throw their hard-earned money away. And even the people that do have money, they're conscious about it because they don't know what's going to happen in the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12. And that's a big challenge for everyone. And I relate, I respect it. And it's just been a very hard time in not just the brewing space, but customer service and hospitality in general. COVID forced breweries to package their product, because if your tap room had to be closed because of restrictions, or you could only have a third or a quarter of the capacity,
you got to find a way to move your beer some other way. So yeah, breweries quickly bought canning lines. They quickly contracted to the mobile canners to try and get some product out there. But there's two problems with that. One is a whole bunch of breweries started to do that at the same time, and not all of them are going to do it successfully. And the margins are less, right? You're only getting the wholesale price for that can of beer, as opposed to getting the retail price on a pint of beer in your tap room. And so if you built your business around getting that extra, extra, 50 cents or, $1 a pint, and suddenly you don't have that dollar anymore, you got to find another way to make up for it. And so, and there's ways to do it, and many breweries are making that pivot. But that is the challenge that they're all facing at this point in terms of how do I maintain a viable brewery when I can't rely as much on getting that full price for a pint of beer, instead having to let distributors and retailers take a cut.
Yeah, I mean, I played the role of many, and there's no real reason behind it other than that I was the most available. And the most equipped with what I was doing. Again, coming from the restaurant industry, working as the taproom manager, the accountant, the bookkeeper, the chef, everything. These are all things that I was very familiar with prior to us opening in this space. Sales piece, I've done a little bit of sales in the past for myself as well, and I had the most time to go out and hit liquor stores and chat with people at restaurants, managers of restaurants. I also had a few connections, which always helps as well in the restaurant industry. But again, it's one of those things that, like a taproom manager, like a brewer, like a chef, the sales rep position needs to be a full-time position. And there's only, so many hours in the week. And those are one of the things that I couldn't put as much time as I had hoped to into it, even though we were very, very, very successful. Looking at our numbers, being in, I think it was 32 restaurants overall in the first year, and being in just over 100 liquor stores in Alberta over the first year. I was pretty proud that we were able to get there. And that wasn't just me. I did have my help from my partners. Christina and Scott specifically did a lot of work on the back end trying to help get into those spaces as well. But yeah, I think again, one of those things that we're proud of, that we were able to do that type of thing. So I think a full-time sales rep would have prolonged what was happening already. I don't think that was the nail in the coffin for us. Help in sales, help in dollars, help in revenue, absolutely, but there are more factors than just the amount that we were pushing into those stores. That's a tough battle for any business. Obviously any margin you have coming into your own business alone, when you manufacture here, package here, label here, and tap here, whether it's cans or kegs, you'll always make more. You cut out the middleman in a lot of ways. Liquor stores is definitely a smaller margin, and volume is always a big portion of that. You always want to see as much as you can go out the door. But again, that comes with its own challenges, because the more that you're selling out to the liquor stores, the more you have to brew, the more grains you have to buy. So it's such an even balance of how much you're actually producing, how much you're able to produce in terms of, I guess, finances, and then being able to obviously get that into liquor stores or connect, and those are the challenges as well. Is the economy's hurting. We know that a lot of that has to do with inflation. We know that a lot of that has to do with taxes, and there's the taxes aren't getting easier. The province isn't helping small businesses, not just breweries, but small businesses in general. It's getting harder and harder to make a dollar. Those dollars turn into 75 cents, and that 75 cents turns into 20 cents real quickly if it's not done accordingly. I find that a lot of, this is a personal opinion, I find that a lot of things are increasing in price. One thing that I've noticed in the last year as things have gone astronomical is beer has not, at least not from our standpoint. None of us, not that I know of, no one has raised their pint prices. No one has raised their can prices in the store, in their tap room. What the liquor stores and the restaurants decide to do on their own, that's completely their prerogative. But it's crazy to think that you can get a 20-ounce pint for less than $9 in a tap room, but then you're paying $13 for a 16-ounce pint in certain restaurants within the city, but so we're not increasing our prices. If we have, it's been very minuscule. I know that's for us for sure. So it is harder. And I think a big piece of that is we still want the general public, the people that love craft breweries, to see us as the same. We don't want to have to nickel and dime, but eventually it's going to get to the point where those prices need to raise because we are coming up on another tax hike with liquor and such in the coming months here.
Well, a rising tide rises all boats, but the tide has stopped rising. We're not at a neap tide yet. It's still, the water level is still pretty high. And so I think it's still easy to have that sense of community and that sense of cooperation. But I think as we start to see economic pressures hitting, there will be tensions on that sense of community. I don't think it'll ever become dog eat dog because it's not the nature of craft beer, right? People get into it for a particular reason. Nobody's particularly profit hungry. I mean, obviously they have to make a profit, otherwise you don't have a viable business. But no one's out here looking, people who survive in the industry anyway, know you're not going to become a millionaire, right? So you're there just to try and make a living, make some good beer. And so I think that helps dampen that sort of more competitive instincts between breweries. But there is no questions that tensions will rise a bit as the market becomes tighter. And there isn't such an easy way to just sort of make a go of it. And so I think that and we've seen that in other cities. When we look at Vancouver, we see it in Toronto, we see some of that competitive pressures bubbling up into feuds and into disputes. And that can happen in any industry, obviously. But I think we haven't seen that in Edmonton because we've been so small, relatively speaking, right? We're still only at a couple dozen breweries. Everybody knows each other, right? That's a really powerful bonding. If you all know each other and you go drinking on Friday night together and you're all visiting each other's brew houses and having a beer, that really helps build a sense of community. But at the end of the day, if there's a limited number of consumers' dollars, that's going to speak loudly. And we'll see how that plays out, and none of us can guess. But I do anticipate it'll be a more complicated relationship between the breweries.
One of the challenges that we had from the very, very beginning, and I'm not sure if I spoke to this last time, is when we originally built, we were set to open in May. So while you're talking about business plans, our business plan was to open May 1. Obviously, we got pushed and we opened 6 months later to November. So that started us behind right off the hop. Even opening a month prior to would have put it in a situation where we were able to make an impact on a holiday season and things like that, where we kind of missed the mark. And while we did very, very good, and even coming into the time when we were closing, we were still seeing a lot of benefits, a lot of great people coming through the doors. Yeah, we started off behind, and that's where it kind of led us to where we are now. And we would have loved to push it a couple more months, but as everybody or most people know, January and February are the slowest months, not just in hospitality, but general for sales for any business, maybe other than groceries or whatever the case is. But you see less people in malls, you see less people at restaurants, you see less people leaving the house. One, holidays just ended, people spent a lot of money. And two, it's freezing. And I mean, it hasn't been until today. It's minus 40 outside, whatever the case is. But the biggest challenge was for us in regards to, planning for a year, 2 years ahead, and we had all these plans, was that we started 6 months later than we anticipated, which was hard for us for sure.
Both pathways, the staying small and just, we'll just have our tap room and we'll, just kind of produce beer for locals, or that more expansionist, we're going to grow, we're going to expand, we're going to have multiple locations, we're going to go to multiple cities. Both of those strategies have risks. I think the obvious risk of growing, the roadside is littered with breweries who've attempted to make the jump, who've attempted to sort of make the big leap and say, okay, we're going to quadruple capacity and we're going to start distributing to other provinces. Wild Rose is a perfect case in point, right? They ran into trouble when they tried to make the jump, and in the end they got bought out, right? Because the company was going to collapse, right? We see that across the country. When breweries try and make that next step, that's a very precarious step, because you have to basically make a leap of faith, and you obviously invest millions of dollars, and then if it doesn't pan out, you got a problem. So that's the risk on that model, is that you go big, you get too big, too fast, and you can't sustain yourself, and you kind of collapse like a house of cards. And we have seen that happen, and I think that there is, for some breweries in Canada, there's a risk of that happening to them soon. On the other hand, though, wanting to stay small, while it seems like it's a more sustainable approach, we'll just kind of do our thing and, we'll make enough money that we can pay ourselves and pay a brewer and some taproom staff. Problem with that is you lose your resiliency, right? Small changes, relatively small changes in economic fortunes, in consumer patterns, your margin between success and failure is much narrower. And as a result, you're more vulnerable to those kinds of things. And so that's the risk of being small, is that you're more easily, if that rising tide turns into a tidal wave, you're more likely to get drowned by it, right? Than if you were a bit bigger and you could kind of sustain and kind of ride the wave out. And I think so there's risks to both models. There's no question that there's risks to both models there. At the end of the day, I think this is something I wanted to make sure I highlighted, is I think in the years of watching the industry, watching some breweries fail, some succeed, some grow, some not, I've kind of come to the theory that a successful brewery is able to combine 3 ingredients. And I don't mean, hops, barley, and yeast. You've got to have a quality product, right? I like to say that bad beer will kill you, good beer won't save you, right? But it's an adage that if you're just not, and especially now as things are getting tighter in the market, if you don't have a good product, and that the definition of good can shift depending on who your consumers are, but if you're not making a product that consumers go, oh yeah, okay, it's a good beer, you're not going to make it, right? So that's one. That's the first ingredient. The second ingredient is having a really clear sense of who you are. And what I mean by that is, what kind of brewery are you? Who is your audience? Who are you trying to sell beer to, right? Are you wanting, what scale do you want to make it on? So you have to have what that I think is about is having a really clear business model and a really clear vision for the brewery. It's like, this is who we're serving. And then locate yourself where those people are. The people that you want to reach, where are they? And so then go find them, right? And be in those places, be in those spaces. So that's about having a really smart strategic business approach. There are multiple models that can succeed in craft beer, but you can't play in all of them. You can't be a production brewery and a little small cozy tap room and a little sort of nimble, nano brewery that's got a new product every week. You can't do all 3 of those things, right? They're not compatible. So you got to pick a lane and decide that this is what our lane is. Most successful breweries have been ones that figured out early on, this is who we are, this is what we do. And then the third ingredient is you've got to have a story. Right? I mean, marketing people would just say, well, you need a good brand. And certainly that's clearly part of it. But I feel like it's bigger than just brand. Like, I think you need to have something that's a coherent personality for your brewery, right? And that needs to stretch itself throughout the whole business in terms of the types of beer you make. What's your taproom experience, right? Like, what do they, when someone walks in the door, what's the ambiance? What's the atmosphere that they're picking up? And that better align with the beer they're going to get. And then that should also then align with your actual branding, right? How do you package your products? What do your can labels look like, right? What's your logo? What's your name? All of that stuff has to be put together in a coherent package and seem authentic, right? And a lot of it, so maybe that's a story about who the owners are. Maybe it's about their background and how they're members of the community, or how they're these feisty 2 guys who, wanted to start a brewery on a shoestring, or whatever the story is. Make sure it works its way through the whole beer experience for the consumer. And breweries who do that effectively are going to be more successful. Those that are really more muddled in what their storyline is and who they are. And I think about, like, again, there's lots of stories that you can build from, right? Like, Ben Stick's image, right? It's the 4 former Alley Cat brewers. I know they're not all there now, but and they're in the old Wings, soy sauce factory. It's all feels very kind of like, Gen X and sort of feisty little guys who are kind of quirky, and they've got their kind of, fun kind of thing going on. Right across the street, you've got Blind Enthusiasm's The Monolith, right? Which is elegant and classy, and from top to bottom exudes kind of like top quality, like everything about it, every detail is paid attention to. Two extremely different brands coexisting across the street from one another, right? So there is many ways to do this. The key is just to make sure that people understand very quickly who you are, right? And people who go to the Monolith know what they're going to get. They know why they're going there. And even if they don't know, oh, what is this Monolith? I've never been here before. I'll go walk. And they walk in the doors, they'll know instantly, right? By the decor, by the beer that are being put up on offer, right? Even things down to like the music being played. Across the street to Ben Stick, you're in this old industrial factory, right? It's all concrete and cement, and it's kind of funky. It's kind of got this almost sort of ad hoc guys in a basement kind of feel to it. But it's the same issue though. As soon as you walk in the door, you know what you're getting, right? And the branding kind of lines up with it, and the beer that they're making lines up with it. That's what makes a successful brewery, is someone who can put those 3 ingredients together and then also build a story around all of them that makes sense to the consumers. And if it makes sense to them, they'll drink your beer and they'll be loyal to your beer, right? So I think those are kind of the key elements and the key pieces.
You know what? I think all 5 of us learned so many different things along this entire scenario. While each of us are, I guess you can say, very senior in the roles that we were in prior to opening up this business. We all came from different avenues and different areas of the workforces and different parts of the world. I say parts of the world, but different workforce pieces, different jobs. So I think we learned an absolute just plethora of knowledge, just so much. The biggest factor I think that I recognized, and I said it to my partners this past week, was, I'm proud. After seeing the volume of people that came in here on our last week after making that announcement, I'm proud to say that we did do what we set out to do, and that was to be a part of the community and make an impact in Edmonton. And I think my partners can agree to that, just in them saying, like that was, we could have announced that and saw a few of our regulars walk through the door, and that would have been a nice week. Saying goodbye to some of our close friends that we've made over the year and a bit, saying goodbye to some good regulars, our staff, and like that was one of the hardest pieces, was the staff. But just seeing the sheer volume of bodies walking through the door every single day, event or not, just really showed. I think we all felt very, very proud of the fact that we did what we set out to do. We wanted to be involved in Edmonton. We wanted Edmonton to be involved with us. We wanted to make an impact in a certain way. Something that I'll hold dear in my heart is the friendships that I've made in the brewing community in Edmonton. I've said it before, and I'll say it to a million people. I'll shout it from the rooftop, just how wonderful the brewing community in Edmonton truly, truly is. It blows my mind how even positive it was from everybody when we announced to them that we were going to be shutting our doors and such as well. And I'll hold those relationships, and I'll take those relationships as long as I can. It's been absolutely wonderful, and yeah, it's just something that I'm very, very happy about.
So I think one of the key factors in Edmonton finally starting to catch up a little bit in terms of our brewery, our beer scene, has been some late but appreciated changes to bylaws. Edmonton was for decades notoriously difficult to open a brewery in, right? Zoning bylaws and other sort of layers of rules just made it a headache. It still is a bit of a headache, especially compared to other smaller centers who kind of like they're so excited to have you, they'll do anything to help make it happen. Edmonton's never really approached it that way. Up until a few years ago, the Edmonton city councils were kind of suspicious about breweries. They sort of saw them as somehow, sordid kind of operations. And so they basically forced them into light industrial zones, right? Breweries often open in light industrial zones for their own reasons. The rent is cheap, And so especially if you're not trying to draw customers to your brewery, yeah, you can open up in a light industrial area for a lot cheaper than if you're opening up on White Ave, right? But if you want to actually attract people and create street traffic and create kind of some kind of local community buzz, being in a light industrial area, that's not going to work, right? And so when the city finally realized that breweries aren't a traditional light industrial business and that they are actually quite compatible with other commercial businesses, that was a really important, pivot. When the city finally went, oh, okay, yeah, you can build a brewery wherever you want, basically. I mean, you can't plunk it in the middle of a residential area, but that's fine. Although I also imagine with the new bylaws, you might be able to. But anyway, that I think was really important because then it suddenly opened up the number, like the range of breweries you could create. You could create a brew pub in a busy street area, right? You could create a funky little brewery kind of in a commercial district that people kind of want to get traffic to, right? And so that was a really huge piece. Combined with some key policy changes made by the province that also smoothed opening up breweries in Alberta. The first one was eliminating the production capacity requirement. I won't get into the details, but that was such a dumb rule, and it existed for decades because it just meant you couldn't open a small brewery. You had to open a mid-sized brewery, and that's expensive. So it really, really held back the industry. So that got removed in the early 2010s. And then controversial they definitely were, but the markup rules by the Notley government between 2015 and 2019, very controversial. If you look back at it now, though, they worked, right? It really helped create the space that the industry needed to be able to establish a strong base in the market. And then once that base happens, you didn't need the protections anymore, and they've now been removed, and everybody's surviving. So I think it just shows that policy actually impacts business in very direct ways, something I've always believed.
I mean, location will always play a role in anything that you do. I don't think the location that we were in was the driving factor for our challenges. Being off the beaten path, you can definitely lean into that a little bit. But I do find that most of the breweries in Edmonton are off the beaten path, including even if you look at something like Happy Beer Street, where now they've been recognized as being a place with all these craft breweries. Prior to that, and before they even named themselves Happy Beer Street, it's just an industrial area. It's obviously easier to generate foot traffic when you're on a main road, but obviously being on a main road like that, White Ave, Jasper Ave, places like that, then you're battling, the higher rent and the higher leasing. So that's why, you find a lot of those breweries in the kind of random spots and such in the Edmonton area. With something like a restaurant, the entire square footage or majority of that square footage that is being rented is utilized for customers walking in the door. Breweries, 2.5, 3/4 are being used for production area, and you're not generating any dollars out of that in terms of people in the front of house. So you're either looking for a smaller space, or you're looking for a space off the beaten path because you're going to pay less for what you're using for your equipment in the back.
One of the things that's really interesting is how now that breweries can basically be anywhere in the city, they've organically clustered themselves in districts, right? So we have Happy Beer Street on 99th Street, which has 8 or 9 breweries now. We've got the Hot Pocket starting to form in the Oliver 124th Street area. That's all very natural and very organic. It's really fascinating how that plays out. But I think it's a combination of two things. It's a combination of those are districts that the target audience is readily available, right? So, middle-class neighborhoods of a particular demographic who are more likely to be interested in craft beer, an urban kind of crowd, as I say, maybe a bit, tilting sort of younger to middle-aged, right? They like to be able to kind of walk and cycle around their neighborhoods, and they appreciate that kind of existence. They don't get in their car and drive 20 minutes to get to the movie theater or whatever. And so that allows a sort of space where you can actually create little pockets, little zones where people could literally go to 2, 3, 4 breweries in an afternoon and and have a different experience at every single one of them. And so they actually, it's a really, what's interesting about Happy Beer Street, I think in particular, but even the Hot Pocket starting to evolve in that direction, is how it naturally is creating diversity of beer styles, beer approaches, and branding, right? Is that you have very different breweries along Happy Beer Street. If you work from north to south, you're not just going from youngest to oldest, because Alley Cat's at the south end and they're the oldest, but you're getting such a diversity of experiences, right? Whether it be Bent Stick and then the Monolith, which I talked about, but then look at Ale Architect's kind of feel and approach to beer, so different than Omen, who focuses on dark beer, right? And then there's Odd Company, which has kind of its own interesting kind of quirky 1970s vibe, right? And so you can get different experiences all within a few blocks. That's a boon for the consumer. Like as a customer, that's just fun. You spend a Saturday afternoon, you hit 4 breweries, get a taster flight at each one. And if you happen to be in the area, you can walk home. So I think these areas are really important in terms of building a sense that there actually is a beer community out there, that there is a beer, it's a thing, right? That you can do. It's not just, oh yeah, we got some breweries and I'll buy some beer on my way home from work. For the weekend, I'll go stop by my liquor store, get some local beer. But actually realizing that they're happenings. It's like, oh, I won't just pick up a 4-pack on my way home. It's like, oh, maybe I'll spend, part of my Saturday visiting some places, visiting some friends, and then also seeing all these breweries, right? And I think, to date, I think the city of Edmonton and Travel Alberta haven't done enough with these little pockets of breweries, because I think there's a tourist possibility there, that you actually, visitors to a city would love the idea of being able to hit a handful of local breweries in an afternoon. So I think there's a real tourism value there that has not been capitalized on by the city or by the province. They're getting there. I mean, we now have the Alberta Ale Trails, so that's kind of the early stages. I find the ale trails to be just a little too sprawling. I think you could be much tighter. But there's potential there at least. I know when I travel, and I know I'm not your usual tourist, one of the first things I do, but even before I'm booking my hotel or whatever, is like, where is the cluster of breweries? Because I know there will be a region of the city, a part of the city, that will have a cluster that I could hit 5 breweries in an afternoon. Like I've been to Vancouver a couple times in the last few months, and Vancouver's got I would argue they've got 5 different areas where if you go to that within 20 block radius, you can hit a half a dozen breweries. And then a different part of the city, you can do the same thing. So Vancouver's pretty hard you couldn't get to all of those in one day, but you could certainly do one part of the city. So you think about Happy Beer Street, if you're staying if you're staying downtown, well, you could maybe, take a cab over and then spend your day there, but you're not going to be able to do that and hit Hot Pocket and maybe hit SYC and maybe head down to Town Square and because they're just too far apart. And so I think that's why I think these clusters are really, really valuable. And I also think they're organic because they match where that's that part of the story. You put your brewery where the people are. As a lifelong Edmontonian, I'm well aware that the breweries are clustered, and they're clustered in certain, if you think about it, there are no breweries in Northeast Edmonton. There are no breweries in Southwest Edmonton, right? And so sort of Southeast, as you get more east, doesn't have any breweries, right? And I think there's a reason for that. I've been thinking about this, right? Geographically, those areas of the city, and I'm a Northeast boy, so I'm not dissing any of those particular parts of the city, is that the culture is different there, right? You generally don't work there. You generally work somewhere else, and then you're driving, right? And so you go home to go home. You don't go home, and obviously it's young families and it's newcomers and that's where they go. Northeast Edmonton, Southeast Edmonton, and Southwest Edmonton. So it changes how you sort of see your neighborhood being. If you live in Old Strathcona, you're choosing Old Strathcona because you want that city vivacity and energy and life and things to do that you could, go home, have a bite to eat, and then go out and hit a couple, hit an event or something. And so a brewery more naturally fits there than if you drive home to Manning, right, on Manning Drive, you're going home for the night, right? You're not then going to get back out and get in your car and drive 10 blocks to a brewery. And so I think there's a reason why the breweries have settled where they are. And I actually think I think that's something that the city of Edmonton needs to think about, because it's not like Northeast Edmontonians and Southwest Edmontonians don't deserve breweries in their neighborhoods. It's that the city planning and the design of our city has worked against that. It's just one small microcosm of how the design of our city has not necessarily worked for people. We still have the opportunity as a city to evolve, to make our communities more vibrant places in your local area, right? We can still do that, but it requires a different mindset in terms of development, it takes a mindset in terms of zoning, and a different mindset in terms of what is possible. What is possible in Clairview? Right? We don't think about that now. I think about if we redesign Clairview, if we create some spaces in Clairview, you could get a brewery in Clairview and people living in Clairview would love it. But right now it's just not there because the urban design works against it.
The Instagram post, I'll speak to that. So we made that decision of the date exactly of when we were going to be locking the doors. Not too long before I actually put that post together. That post was actually supposed to go out 2 days before it did, and it ended up going out Christmas Eve. And that was because I couldn't bring myself to do it. It was difficult. It was difficult to put those things into words and to express what we were feeling in the most positive, upbeat, and thankful situation that we could put out there. Obviously I got feedback from partners, but running the social, the majority of the social from build to close, I've obviously typed up most of the copy and such on those Instagram posts, 99% of them. So that post was supposed to go up, 2 days earlier, and it took me until Christmas Eve, and one of my partners saying, "We got to put it up," and I said, "I know." And so putting it together, it took a long time. But in the post, it says, it's not goodbye, it's see you later. We would love to think that the brand, the IP of Asymmetrical Brewing, isn't dead fully, but as it sits right now, we don't know what the future looks like.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is we're seeing more of like local community events and festivals, and of course Edmonton's a festival city, right? Recognizing, and this is part of the growth and the maturation of the beer scene in Edmonton, is recognizing, wait, you mean we don't just have to provide Labatt and Molson to our customers, right? To our patrons? And partly it's because the patrons are asking for it, right? They go to the local baseball team or the basketball team, or they go to an arts festival, or they go to Shakespeare in the Park or wherever they might be going, and they're expecting something local. They're expecting one of the breweries that they know are in their community. They're expecting them to be at their community event. And I think that expectation is a wonderful transformation from a number of years ago. And then obviously the bigger the event, the harder it will be to insert local breweries into that scene, right? The pinnacle of difficulty will be Rogers Place and the Oilers hockey games. But even that's possible, right? Is that they've got a pseudo craft section in their beer offerings at Rogers Place now, right? And lots of cities have started opening up portions of their tap lines and portions of their offerings to local craft beer, right? And that too will come, right? You go to, Fenway Park in Boston, and it's all local breweries, right? And so I think it will come. They're just tougher nuts to crack because there's so much money involved. Like, it's really interesting to me that this last fall, the Oilers organized an Oktoberfest. It was okay. But what was interesting to me, though, is that it was mostly local breweries. And even the Molson product was not the standard Molson Canadian. It was, their more sort of pseudo-craft offerings. And so even they're recognizing if they're going to try and do community-anchored events, they got to pay attention to the local community. So I think that's a really positive shift. And thinking about local ingredients, I mean, it's one of the, I think the most recent development has been the rapid growth of craft maltsters as a feed into breweries. And hops is a little more slower to evolve, in part because Alberta's climate is not particularly well suited for hop growing. Our season's just a tad too short, so you've really got to kind of push the margins of the season in Alberta. I think it's really important for the industry to have these throughputs, right? Being able to source your ingredients from less than 100 miles away, right? Made by someone and made by somebody in a local community here in Alberta, as opposed to a big multinational corporation. I think it's important for the industry for two reasons. One is, ironically, I think it actually increases the stability of supply, right? They're making malt for Alberta breweries. They're not making malt for Oregon breweries, right? The local maltsters. And so that's their market. That's their core market. So they will make malt for local breweries, and they can tailor for what they're looking for. If you go to one of the big maltsters, and there's no, and they're probably, like Canada Malting and RAR, and their quality is impeccable. There's no question about the quality of that product, but they're selling to Anheuser-Busch, right? They're selling to all those breweries in Oregon. They're selling to all of those breweries around the world. And so Alberta's a very small part of their market, and so it doesn't get that same level of priority. I think for the consumer, I don't think it's as big a deal for the beer drinker. I mean, it's interesting to guys like me to go, oh, they made this with Hamel, the stuff from Red Shed, and that's kind of interesting. But it's hard to see the difference in the glass, right? A good quality malt, and that's partly because wherever you get the malt, it's high quality stuff, right? So I think for the consumer, it's more of just an interesting aside. Like it's a part of the story you can feed in. Right? But I don't think it's really quite crucial. Like, I think about like Siding 14, who's in Ponoka. They have their own farm, but they're making their own malted barley. It's not enough to be 100% supplying their needs. But if you didn't have an interview with the owner, you wouldn't know that, right? If you just bought a can of their beer from the liquor store, you wouldn't know that it was made by barley that they grew. And it's because it's just so hard to leverage that, right? I think it's really important for the industry. It allows us to be able to create that. There's a bit of a sense of terroir, that we can create our own flavors of beer because we have our own malt and our own hops. But I think it's more important for the industry players than it is for the consumer at the end of the day. I think at the consumer, they just want to know they like the taste of the beer, right? And it matters less to them that it was made in Penhold as opposed to, Germany.
Yeah, I mean, I never want to speak for anybody else. I never want to speak for anybody else's business, but it's a hard industry. It's a hard business. I mean, hospitality in general, when I look at the food side or I look at the beer side, when I work in restaurants for as long as I did and I come into this, you hear it all the time, but it's long, hard hours for everybody involved, and the margin is so very thin that, unless you're getting a lot of, I guess, money, called bodies, sales through the door on the shelves or whatever the case is, that is at the end of the day what fixes everything. And it sounds greedy and it sounds almost negative in a sense, but that is truly what what these businesses depend on. Again, not to speak to them, but there's a lot of fantastic breweries in the city. But I think the biggest challenge that we've continued to see is, a lot of our, even friends of ours, restaurants, and a lot of Edmontonians are still drinking beers from other provinces, other places of the world, and they're bringing them into restaurants. So it's hard to compete. And then the ones that do bring on the Edmonton beers, those are the ones with 50, 60 taps for whatever reason. They business model. It's great to be on those, but when there's that much choice and that much opportunity, you just don't move through as much very quickly. So it takes effect on the local businesses here in Edmonton. We've been hearing it preached from everyone since the pandemic of, shop local, shop local, shop local. And it's great to see Alberta is focused on shopping local, but I think when you're looking at it as a whole, each city just needs to look a little bit further inwards of local is Alberta, but local is also your city. So local is Edmonton. So how can we support those businesses in Edmonton and trying to drive some revenue into those individuals' pockets? I won't say the name because it's theirs again to speak, but a friend of mine, someone I worked with for many, many years, they own their own restaurant business as well, and they actually closed down. They closed their doors yesterday, and they're not too far from us here. You might know who they are, but so it's not a secret as what we've heard of more businesses following suit. I hate to say that. I wouldn't be shocked, but I would never, ever, ever wish this upon absolutely anyone. No small business, no ma and pa, no friends, no local businesses. I don't even wish it for the big box. I just want to see success for everyone. And what we've went through, how we came to this decision, how hard it was, I don't wish it upon anyone.
As part of that byproduct of the growth of the industry in the last 10 years or so, like it's not just the number of breweries that have increased, but the market share has increased. So a few years ago, it was estimated, it's hard to get accurate data in Alberta because we have a privatized retail system, but we were locally made craft beer was about 5 to 7% of the market. And the bulk of that was Big Rock. Today, the best estimates put the Alberta craft beer market as about 15% of the beer market. So that means, about 1 in 7 beer sold in the province of Alberta is made by a local Alberta brewery. So this still doesn't sound like a lot. 1 in 7 doesn't sound like a very big number, but it's a tripling in the market share in less than a decade. And so that's, I think, a significant maneuver. And it's going that jump from 15 to 30 is going to be much harder. And we've seen that in BC. BC's at about 25% now, and that's probably kind of like the pinnacle. But that next step will be harder, and it'll take longer. But 15 is a good solid toehold. And so I think what that means, when you're 15% of the market, the big boys care. AB and Bev and Sleeman and Molson Coors, while they still have the bulk of that 85%, because some of that 85% is imports, they still have, say, 70% of the market all to themselves. 15 years ago, they had 90% of the market to themselves. So yeah, they're very much paying attention. You can see that they're paying attention. So they don't care about any individual brewery, right? They don't care about, the small little brew pub on, a corner in downtown Edmonton. So they're not particularly concerned about any specific business, but they are concerned about the broad trends in the industry. And we've seen that they're concerned about it, because what did they do? They had a strategy of, they put out their own, what I call them pseudo-craft beer, right? With the craft kind of branding, but made at the Labatt's plant here in town, right? Or in one of the big mega facilities that Molson has in the country, right? And so that was them trying to horn in on the popularity of craft beer, right? By producing their own kind of versions of it. For the most part, consumers didn't buy that, right? So then they said, okay, we'll just buy them. So then they went through a bit of a raft of purchasing, and we saw this more in the States than we did in Canada, but But we see them buying up, we see them buying up Wild Rose. We saw them in a very odd move buying up Banded Peak in Calgary, right? And so that is an attempt to say, well, okay, if we can't create our own pretend brands, we'll just buy a brand. I don't know if that was successful or not. I think it's probably been less successful than more, but it's their attempt to try and edge into the market and edge into that segment of the market. So they are very much concerned about that segment of the market because their business is in crisis because the total pie for beer is shrinking. That affects them more than craft beer because craft is still growing. So from the inside of the pie, craft beer is getting bigger and taking a bigger piece from the inside of the middle of the pie, and at the same time the pie is getting smaller. So you can see there's a squeeze happening on both ends. So yeah, they're concerned, right? And they should be, because if you kind of cast forward another 10 years, the big corporate brewers have a bit of a problem on their hand, right? And we're noticing now with craft starting to slow down itself, they're divesting themselves of these breweries that they scooped up, and sometimes for pennies on the dollar, which is interesting. So I don't know what their next move is going to be, but I think the good news is that for a local brewery who's focused on Edmontonians and serving Edmontonians, those broader macro trends in the industry don't matter very much, right? You just stick to your fundamentals, right? What kind of brewery are you? Make sure you make good beer. Who your customers, keep them happy. Keep coming in the door. And that's one of the nice things about being a small brewery, especially one with a tap room. You see your customers every day. So you don't just have to go by sales charts. Oh, this is our best-selling beer. You can actually talk to them. Oh, I really like this beer, but I wish it had a little more malt to it, right? Oh, I really like this beer, but I really preferred that other beer you made last month, right? And if you take that kind of feedback seriously, you can continue to evolve and shift and change what you do to keep your customers happy and keep them coming back.
Don't rush it. That's the biggest piece of advice. Don't rush it, but rush it, whatever that means. I think it depends on who it is and what it is. I think it depends on their location and what they're striving to do. I am aware of a few breweries that will be opening up over the next year or two. I think my biggest piece of advice is right now is focus on is manufacturing and distribution, tap room, restaurants, things like that. Those are harder. You can still have them, but definitely don't need 50 to 180 seats. So I definitely focus on more of that and trying to drive through those can sales or those restaurant sales through kegs, than creating so much space for yourself up front. And there are certain breweries in Edmonton and many breweries in Calgary that have done that very, very well. But it's different business models and such as well. They're not brewing the same amount, or they're brewing off-site in a certain sense, whatever the case is. So everyone's got a different business model. If you're going straight as just a brewery, you just want to be a brewery with a small little tap room, that's what you need to focus on. You think you need 5,000, take half. You don't need that much space in order to be successful.
The model when Alley Cat first got up and running, and Wild Rose and breweries like that, was you have 3 or 4 core beer, you put out maybe 4 seasonals a year just to kind of keep it interesting, right? Sometimes if a seasonal's popular enough, you kick it into the core lineup. And it was about building that kind of brand loyalty, right? It's like, yeah, I'm a Full Moon drinker, right? And every time they go to a bar, it's like, oh yeah, give me a Full Moon, right? Or give me a Trad, right? Because basically Big Rock had the same model, just on a bigger scale. I think that's evolved as more consumers have gotten interested in craft beer, and as there's more craft breweries. I think there is an increasing need for breweries to show a diversity of product. And I think that means 2 things. I think it means that you don't just have the light lager, the pale ale, the brown ale, right, and the fruit beer. You got to have a mixture of styles. These days you got to have a New England, right? You still have to have a fruity kind of beer. You still have to have a cream ale or a lager or something that's still kind of staples. But you got to start bringing out something new. And so I think it's a bit of a push-pull. I think consumers are looking for novelty, right? If they're going to come to your tap room, well, they don't want to just have that pale ale that they had the last 3 times that they were at the tap room. Why would they? I think that's the thing. If you keep them coming in the door, there's got to be something new for them to try, or else they're not going to come in the door, right? And so that's I think one of the factors is that need. Oh yeah, we got to keep offering up seasonals and one-offs and rotationals and series in order to keep it interesting enough that people keep wanting to come back. Oh, what have they got on tap this week, right? That kind of impact. But I also think it's on the other direction. It's about trying to demarcate yourself from other breweries. So you're trying to keep your customers happy because they're demanding more, but you're also trying to make sure that you look different than the brewery that literally is down the street from you. And so it's just a natural sort of like, well, if they're producing dark beers and they like the hoppy pale ales and IPAs over there, then I should do something else, right? Because in order to create that diversity between breweries. So you need diversity within the brewery, but we also naturally need diversity between breweries. And I think that's what's fed into this. And sometimes it's kind of insane, right? There are breweries in the province that literally put out a new beer every week. And clearly they're not expecting everybody to try that beer. Like even a guy like me can't keep up with a new beer a week. But it's because they just want to have that constant flood of something new. They can always point to something new. And so it's just, again, I think it's just part of the process of the maturation of the industry. And that's also one of the advantages of being a small-scale brewery, right? The Labatt plant, which is a marvel in brewing engineering. Like I toured it a few years ago. It's a remarkable site. But they're making such massive batches of beer that they can't just pop out a one-time, oh, let's try a dark lager just for fun. They can't do it because it's not how their production's set up. It's not how their system works. And so they have to literally lock in on a beer and say, we're going to have to commit to this beer. But if you've only got a 10 hectoliter system, or even a 20 hectoliter system, but some of them beers smaller than that, you could play around, right? 10 hectoliters is like, I gotta do my math all of a sudden here, hang on. It's 1,000. So yeah, 10 hectoliters, you're talking like a dozen kegs, right? You could sell a dozen kegs or something, even if it didn't turn out that well and the customers don't like it that much. It might take a couple of months to get through those dozen kegs, but if it's a hot seller, it'll go in a few days, right? So I think that's the nimbleness that craft breweries and small local breweries have that larger breweries don't have. And that's also one of the risks, because earlier we were talking about breweries that try and make that big jump and get... The problem about going bigger in scale is that suddenly you've got a bigger brew house and you're having to make bigger batches, which means you can't gamble. You got to make what you know is going to sell, because if you don't, the risks are way higher. And so I think there's a key component of why we see so many rotational beer and so many one-offs is that they can't. And quite frankly, you talk to a brewer, an actual person on the tools, there's nothing they hate more than every day they get up and they go to work and they make that fruit beer and they make that blonde ale and they make it day after day after day, and they do it because it's their job and they know it's what keeps the lights on. There's nothing more fun for a brewer when the head brewer or whoever says, okay, we're gonna mix it up today and give you something, we're gonna brew something completely different today. The brewers get excited. And so that's, if you think about, so even as a business, in terms of keeping employee morale and keeping your own people happy, right? Letting them play around, letting them play with recipes, letting them brew a different beer each day, there's gold there in terms of human resources and sort of managing the people within a brewery, which we often forget when we see the front end of a brewery. They're still a business. They still have employees, right? They still have to find a way to retain those employees. They still have to so they have to do all the things that any business has to do. And that's what that actually can feed into it, giving your brewers something fun to do. And as a result, then you have something more creative out front for your consumers. That's a win-win for a brewery. But yeah, there is free reign. I mean, there's nothing regulating brewing, right? There's you don't have to have a classification or degree to be able to brew beer. And there's obviously there are health concerns, but there's no significant health concerns in beer that they actually have to be concerned about it, right? I think the government, is more concerned about the production of milk than it is with the production of beer, and that's for good reason, right? Nothing that can go bad in beer can hurt you, right? Can harm you. It's not going to make you sick. It's just going to make beer taste bad, right? So it is a bit of a free-for-all that way. And I think that there's a plus and a negative to that. Like I think about home brewing, and I'm a longtime home brewer. That's how, I think maybe I'm a good example, right? I haven't jumped into the professional end, but I started off as a home brewer. That's where my passion for beer that's where that got built, right? I became passionate about making beer. Like that process of not just buying a beer and drinking it, which is what I did during university, right? But then afterward going, oh, I can make it. And then there's the magic of making that beer. It really sparks a passion. And it's that passion that I think then drives a lot of brewery owners to open their own commercial brewery. It's like, I do this at home, I should just do this, right? I'll quit my job that maybe I kind of like, or maybe I don't like, and I'll do something that I love. So that passion, I think, is often what drives a lot of people into the industry, and that's a good thing. That said, one of the challenges in the industry is home brewing and commercial brewing, professional production brewing, are two completely different creatures. The things you have to pay attention to are completely different. The margins for error are so much smaller in a commercial brewery than they are in a home brewery. And so one of the failings that I've seen over the years is the enthusiastic, passionate home brewer opening up a brewery, thinking they can just kind of just do it on a bigger scale, and the beer isn't very good. So what I think a brewery, again, if we think about successful breweries, because the other flip side is you get someone who, and we've seen these breweries too, open up, they don't really have any background in beer, right? They haven't really worked in the industry. Maybe they're into marketing. Maybe they're in hospitality. They've run bars and restaurants. And so, we'll open a brewery, right? And they hire some professionals and a consultant to set up the brew house, and they hire a professional brewmaster, and they do all that. That also that has pitfalls in that it's missing the passion. So while the beer might be technically sound, you're missing the story, you're missing that sort of extra quality that comes, extra character that comes from really understanding and really loving the process, right? And caring that I'm going to use this hop variety and not that hop variety because this has slightly fruitier notes, or I'm looking for that pineapple and that's going to be in this variety. And if you're just doing this as a business suit, as this is a nice way to add some value to my restaurant, people are going to see through that. So in a way, a successful brewery knows that it needs someone involved that's got that passion, right? Who cares about what they're doing, but then you also need to have people who have the technical know-how, people who have gone to school to learn how to make beer, people who have been brewers for 20 years and so know how to make beer work. And so you need the combination. And probably also, just generally speaking, any small business probably also needs a financial person. And even, a lawyer would be good too. So if you're really building your team, get a home brewer, get some kind of professional brewing person, an accountant, and a lawyer. You get those four, you're probably going to be okay in terms of your brewery succeeding, right? I get less worried about the age. Like, there's a lot of young brewers out there, and it's like, where did you work before? It's like, I just graduated from Olds College, and it can make you a little nervous. It's like, okay, so you haven't actually worked at a brewery, you've kind of worked at Olds, and that's fine, and it's a good program, it's pumping out very good brewers. But there is something to be said about experience. But that's kind of where we're at in the state of the industry, is that we have so many breweries opening up that not everybody can have the experienced brewer that's been around for 15 years. So they take a bit of a flyer on a new graduate, and they bring good stuff with them because they got new, novel ideas. They're not stuck in their ways, right? But on the other hand, there is some risk about not having someone who is a tried and true hand at it. But that's just the way. Again, I think the maturation of the industry, that'll sort itself out.
No, I think the biggest piece I'd like to say is, this last call it 26 months has been absolutely wonderful. I can speak for most of the co-founders on that side. It's been absolutely wonderful to serve Edmonton. It's been wonderful to meet so many great people, to get our name out there and have so many people respond to us in such a positive manner, not just beer, but the community piece in that sense, the art community, the music community, just Edmonton as a whole. I'm born and raised here, and I couldn't think of a better place that I would have opened up a brewery. And just because we didn't make it this time doesn't mean we're going away forever, but biggest piece I want to say is thank you, Edmonton.